God, if you want me to do this, keep opening the doors. If you don't, close the doors. And I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna kill myself over this. This is your thing. And I was accepted into the program. I survived the program.
Hey, Deacon Pedro, thank you so much for carving out some time for chatting today.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so first off, I'm curious to know, as a deacon, where is it that you currently serve right now, and what are your duties as a deacon at your church?
Yeah, so I'm currently in a parish not too far from my home. So that maybe that's the first clarification. So when you're ordained to the diaconate, you may or may not end up being assigned to your own parish, depending on what the needs of the parish is. So the bishop will assign you to a parish. I was assigned to a parish which is very near my home, but technically it's not my geographical parish.
Mhm.
Because at the time they had a ministry to migrant workers, most of them that came from Mexico, so they had a Spanish mass. And I speak Spanish, so it made sense that I would be helping there. They already had a deacon, so they could use a second deacon. It's also a very large parish. So I was assigned there 11 years ago. And since then, the Spanish Mass has moved, the community, so things have changed.
Mhm.
Although that doesn't mean necessarily that you would be reassigned somewhere else. It really depends on the bishop.
Okay, and as a deacon, what are your duties?
Okay, so um, basically, if people go to mass,
Mhm.
they may or may not have. Some people have never seen a deacon. Some people have seen a deacon and they don't realize that it is a deacon. But so the deacon has two two primary functions. The one function is what people mostly see. We assist the priest in the liturgy at Mass. So
Mhm.
if there's a deacon, the deacon is the ordinary minister of the word. So if there's a deacon, the deacon always proclaims the gospel.
Mhm.
Um, for example, when you watch a papal mass, the Pope never proclaims the gospel. It's usually someone else, and it's because it's the Vatican, it's always a deacon. The deacon
Mhm.
is the minister of the word. So the deacon always proclaims the gospel, and because we are ministers of the word, we can also preach. So that's mostly what people see. They'll see, oh,
Mhm.
there's a deacon, he reads the gospel, and then once a month, depending on what the rotation is, you get to preach. As a deacon, we are also sorry, and then at Mass,
Mhm.
you also see the deacon assisting the priest. The deacon is the minister of the cup.
Mhm.
So again, people might not pay attention, but if you really know the liturgy, you know that at one point you pour a little bit of water in the wine just before the consecration, and there's a little prayer: by the mystery of this water, by the mingling of this water and wine, may we come to enter into the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to be in our humanity. So if there's a deacon, it's the deacon that does that. The deacon has the priest the chalice, um, and then elevates the chalice,
Mhm.
and then quite often quite often, because the deacon is the minister of the cup, is the deacon, if you're distributing communion in both species, it's appropriate that the deacon is the one offering the chalice, although that may or may not be done. Obviously, the deacon is also an ordinary minister of the Eucharist, of communion, so we can
Mhm.
distribute communion. So that's at Mass. Oh,
Yeah.
and then you have the three token lines, we call it, quote unquote, the token lines that the deacon says. The deacon can uh, be the one who does the rite of the penitential rite at the beginning of Mass. So sometimes,
Mhm.
so if you say I confess,
Yeah.
Almighty God, everybody does that together. But
Mhm.
then it's the deacon that says, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be. Sometimes the priest can do it as well, but it is appropriate for the deacon to do it. The deacon also invites everyone to exchange a sign of peace.
Mhm.
And then it's the deacon, and this is the most important part, I think. It's the deacon that gives the words of the dismissal. So go and announce the gospel of the Lord at the end of Mass. Mass is
Mhm.
not over until we are sent to, everything that we've been nourished here by word and sacrament, and now we go and bring that out in the community. And in fact, that's where we get the word Mass.
Oh,
Misa
okay.
comes from that dismissal
Mhm.
it used to be in Latin, ite, go, ite,
Mhm.
misa est. Ite literally well, I don't know if it's literal, but it's sort of like go, you are dismissed.
Yeah.
Class dismissed, go. So misa, that's where it comes from. And now with the new translation, we say, go and announce the gospel of the Lord, or
Mhm.
go, go, go. See, now I'm blanking out because I'm not in the moment. Go. Uh,
You're under pressure.
I'm under pressure, but I
You're
usually
out
say,
of the normal element for it.
I
That's
know, I
why.
know. I usually say, "Go and announce the gospel of the Lord."
Yeah.
Uh, Go in peace, glorifying the Lord with your life is another one.
Mhm.
Those are the two common ones. So
Mhm.
that's the role of the deacon because it's the deacon that, I mean, theologically, you can think of it as the priest is there for the people who are coming in the church,
Mhm.
into the church for sacraments, for anything really, for pastoral care. And the deacon is the one who goes out to find the people that are not coming to church. So the deacon goes to the prisons, the deacon goes to the hospitals, the deacon goes to the
Gotcha.
seniors' homes, the deacon goes
Mhm.
to wherever, which is why I was doing ministry to the migrant workers because they come to
Mhm.
Canada, they're migrants, they're working 7 days a week, they're not going to mass.
Mhm.
So we go and do pastoral care out to them. So that's the symbolism of why it's the deacon that says go.
Mhm.
Traditionally, back in the times of the apostles, the first deacons, the deacons would be the ones taking the Eucharist out. So those original kind of ministers of the Eucharist that would go and take the Eucharist to the sick, to the people who couldn't come, it was the deacon, and it's still appropriate for the deacon to do that. That's why we go to hospitals. And then outside of Mass and outside of that ministry of ministry to the poor or ministry to the marginalized,
Mhm.
to the peripheries, the deacon is also an ordinary minister of baptism, so we can officiate baptisms, and we can also officiate marriages.
So it's very, very full, very busy.
Yes, it is.
And somebody had described it as basically being in service of the church. So hearing all of these things really just confirms what I had learned. But I am curious because it's a long journey, I'd imagine, to get there, but it's got to start somewhere. So I'm curious to know about a bit about your faith journey, because obviously you're a man filled with faith. You live it out in your service as a deacon.
Yeah,
Going
that's
back for, I'm curious to know, are you like a cradle Catholic or are you a convert? Like where did that journey to becoming Deacon Pedro, where does it begin?
yeah. Well, it begins on February 8th, 1969, the day of my baptism at 8 days old. I always like to think I mean, that's the day of your baptism.
Hmm.
We're always children of God, but you're part of the family on the day of your baptism.
Hmm.
I grew up in Panama in Latin America, a very Catholic country, culturally Catholic. Although I think that there's, I mean, you still go to daily mass in Panama,
Hmm.
anywhere in Panama City, and the churches are filled on a Monday. Yeah, it's very common. And I think it's more than just culture. So I grew up in this culture, but I also grew up in the 70s. So it's right after Vatican II.
Hmm.
A lot of new things are being tried in the church, charismatic renewal. I actually was part of the charismatic renewal growing up. My mom was very, very devout, very faithful.
Hmm.
So she made sure that we went to mass every Sunday. I mean, I was baptized at 8 days old. She made sure that well, she tried as much as she could to kind of gather us to pray the rosary. We didn't do that very often, but once or
Hmm.
twice a year we'd gather, do the Advent wreath, things like that. My dad was not. Although he was
Oh.
Catholic, he is
Hmm.
Catholic. He's still alive. He's 97, 97 year
Oh
old.
wow.
Um, but he didn't usually go to mass with us. This was something and I think that's also cultural. It's like the women and the children go to
Hmm.
mass. My dad would go to mass maybe once a year. We'd see him at mass, but he was always very respectful, obviously.
Hmm.
So, all the sacraments, First Communion, confirmation, youth group. When I was about 11, I like to tell this story uh, that we had a new associate pastor that came to the parish, and he noticed that there was no youth group, and he was a young, kind of very zealous, 1970s kind of pastor or priest. and he
Hmm.
invited all the young people in the parish to a retreat. I had never been to a retreat. I didn't know what a retreat was. My mom packed me and my brother, my sister up, and we went to this weekend retreat, and it was a charismatic retreat. And if you know anything about the charismatic renewal, it's like
Yes, yes, yes.
not the maybe not the first thing you want to expose an 11-year-old to, but I can tell you, Jermaine, I actually don't remember very much about this weekend, but I remember one night, and I'm assuming that it was the
Hmm.
Saturday night that we were, and it wasn't everybody. It couldn't have been everybody. There were maybe about 12 or 15 of us in a classroom-sized room, standing, and I remember there were candles and there was music, but I think the music was actually singing that the people were singing, and we were all young. I mean, I was probably the youngest, around at
Hmm.
11, and maybe the oldest was 18 or 20. I mean, we were young. I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
if the priest was there, and everybody was praying and praising and worship and speaking in tongues and singing in tongues, and I can tell you that that is the most beautiful thing that I have ever heard in my life. Now I know that we were probably standing around the Blessed Sacrament. At the time, I didn't know. I'd never seen a
Hmm.
monstrance in my life.
Hmm.
Um, I'm assuming that we were in adoration. And I remember, and I still remember that feeling that it was like, this is a little bit of heaven right here. I don't know how to describe it because it could have
Yeah.
been a very weird thing when you think of people speaking in tongues, and it wasn't. It was beautiful. And I've never experienced that again. I've experienced similar, but never again. So I
So
think that
nothing
that
to that
feeling,
degree of like,
no, 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 not at
oh
all.
wow.
And I mean, I think that God gives us kind of those gifts, those little mountaintop experiences, and you're not
Hmm.
supposed to have them all the time. You have them. It's like, I'm here. This is, and I was young, and I think that really, you asked me where does the journey begin? So I jokingly said in my baptism, but that's, I think, when it really begins. And
Hmm.
I've told that priest who organized that retreat, I've told him that it's his fault that I'm a deacon, um, because about probably 2 or 3 years after that. So
Hmm.
we were part of this youth group, charismatic youth group. We were part of a music group at church. I was, I learned to play a lot of musical instruments actually in church. And this guy who was the older brother of one of the girls in the group, he was a doctor, and sometimes he'd come and play with us and, hang out with us. One day he's vested and preaching. And
Oh.
I thought he was like a medical doctor. Like, what are you doing? He had been ordained a permanent deacon, and I
Hmm.
was 12 or, probably 12 years old. And I remember like that really stuck with me.
Hmm.
But then, of course, I forgot, you know,
As
teenagehood,
life progresses
life
forward, as you like
progresses,
go into high school and university.
yeah, exactly. And they say that every Catholic boy thinks about the priesthood. I did not think about that. Like I knew that I was gonna, I like girls too much. I'm gonna get married. I'm gonna have a family. Um,
So
and
there
I
was never a point that you had considered priesthood. Okay,
no,
that's fascinating because that was actually
no.
something I wanted to know. Like, if is that a common thing among permanent deacons? Is like they discerned and wanted to do it, but then thought
No,
against it.
I, I, I don't know if it's common, but I would
Hmm.
say that if someone feels called to the priesthood or a desire for the priesthood and it didn't work out, they should probably not be a deacon because it's a different call. But it's very common. Well, I don't know if it's very common, but I know it happens where it's like, oh, you hear the wives say, a lot of the deacon's wife will say, it's like, oh, my husband, he was in the seminary but he wasn't ordained, and then we got married, and life kind of moved on, and now he wants to be a deacon. It's like, well, maybe he was called to the diaconate and not to the priesthood,
Mm.
but it's like the deacon is not, like the failed seminarian who was not ordained. It's a completely different charism.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a different calling, and in fairness, it's very misunderstood, and it's misunderstood even among deacons. That we still, I
Okay,
mean, it's a very,
tell me a little bit about that in terms for if people kind. Is it that there is the expectation of what it should be versus the reality, or where
well,
does
it's because
where
it's
do you think that
hard.
is?
I think for us, for us. and I would say for us in this day and age, it's difficult to differentiate kind of who you are versus what you do. So quite
Mm,
often, it who you are is reduced to a function. So we talk
like
about,
your
what
job
the
or
exactly. So if you're a doctor, it's easy to say it's like, well, the doctor, that's your job, and you as a doctor, this is what you do, and it's part of who you are, but it's not fully who you are. As a husband, I would say that that's more of who I am as a husband, but it's hard to define what a husband is without talking about the function, what a husband does, or what the duties of the husband are, or so I think that that's the problem with the diaconate. I would say with the priesthood as well, although it's a little easier to understand that
mhm.
a man is a priest, it's who you are and not just what you do, because 24 hours a day, that man is functioning as a priest, whereas the deacon is not functioning as a deacon 24 hours a day,
Oh, I
although
see.
at some level I am a deacon. So you see, it's I don't know else to explain it, and it's hard to understand. So I think that there's a misunderstanding because it's just hard to understand. So the diaconate, if you look at the book of Acts, chapter 6, I mean,
Mhm.
that's where the diaconate starts. The apostles decided that there was too much work to do. They needed to dedicate their time to prayer and to teaching of the word, and they didn't have time to take care of the widows and the orphans. So they anointed 7 men to go and do that work. So that's the diaconate, the ones that go and take care of the widows and the orphans. And we're still doing that today.
Mhm.
But what happened historically is that the diaconate kind of fell off. Actually, originally there were no priests. It was the apostles and the deacons. And even in
Okay.
the early church, the successors of the apostles became the bishops,
Mhm.
and then you had priests because they were kind of so the elders in the community were the priests, but the deacon still was kind of almost like the second in command under the bishop. I
Mhm.
shouldn't say second in command, but it was kind of like the hierarchy was like that. Um,
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying in that. It's not
yeah, it's not
like,
really a
yeah.
hierarchy in that sense, but it was like the deacon works with the bishop,
Mm.
and the priest works with the bishop, but the deacon is not. I mean, we work with the priest, but the priest is not my boss. The bishop is
Yeah.
my boss. And then there was a period of time in the early church where the deacon was the treasurer of the church's. I mean, of the keeper of the church's treasure. That they were
Mhm.
the ones who took care of the finances of the church, which is why you get the story of Saint. Oh, now I'm blanking out. Martyred in Rome because he was asked by the Roman emperor to Saint Lawrence. He was asked
Mhm.
by the Roman emperor to bring me the treasures of the church. And he was asked to bring the treasures of the church because as the deacon, he was responsible for the treasures of the church. And of course, what Saint Lawrence did is he showed up the next day with all the poor people of the community, and he said, "Here you are, emperor. Here are the treasures of the church." And of course, he was burned at the stake for it. Um, uh, so that was tradition. So then what happened is that when the priesthood became kind of a little more prominent and Catholicism became more normalized, it became the
Mhm.
religion of the time, the religion of the people. The diaconate kind of fell off, and it became a step towards the priesthood. So that's why we have a transitional diaconate. So all the priests, before they're ordained
Mhm.
to the priesthood, are ordained to the diaconate. But there used to be, so there are three orders: diaconate, priesthood, and episcopate, deacon, priest, bishops. Um, but there used to be other orders, the minor orders, the order of the porter, the acolyte, the lector, the exorcist. All those were minor orders. And then in some of the Eastern churches, you still have some of the minor orders, and you have like a subdeacon and a deacon and an archdeacon, and then the priesthood. So all priests are ordained to the diaconate first, but that transitional diaconate is a little different, I think, than the permanent diaconate. And the permanent diaconate, really the image of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples,
Mhm.
that's the image of the deacon. The deacon is the one who does that,
Mhm.
like Christ. in service of the church.
Hmm.
The priest is like Christ in offering the sacrifice. The deacon is like Christ in like offering the service. Christ the servant. And then we also model that to the community. So it's not, a lot of times people are asking the deacon, oh, why don't you do this or do that? And I'm thinking, well, no, you do it. You do it. You're the laity. I'm modeling
Yeah.
it
Hmm.
and I can help you, but you do it so that, because, and this is also not completely right, but it's almost like the deacon has one foot in the laity and one foot in the pre, kind of like halfway. It's not, that's
Yeah.
not correct theologically, but it feels that
In,
way, and I think the community feels it because the deacon is married,
mm,
the deacon has kids, the deacon owns a house,
exactly.
the deacon, goes to work every day. So I think the community connects more with the deacon,
Hmm.
um, and
Yeah,
so I think that
I
we're
can
like a
definitely
bridge.
see that because it's like for men who are married, it's like you serve as a model if they decide that's something for them.
Yep.
And for yourself, when you kind of decide that, I'm curious to know about your discernment process in deciding if this is what you wanted to do, and I'm also curious to know. You mentioned your family in that process of discernment, how does your family play a role in that process of yes, the diaconate is for me, or for others, no, the diaconate is not for me?
Yeah.
How does the family play a role in
Yeah.
that process?
Yeah. So the first part of your question is the hard question to answer because you're asking about the call. Like, how do you know? I don't know, but I do know that that
Well,
seed
I
was
guess
planted.
sorry.
No,
What was the call for you? Because
yeah, no,
you can't speak for others for
no, I
sure.
know, but even for me, I don't know if I can, I can sort of tell you, but I can't. So I know that the seed was planted when I was 12 years old when that guy stood up there and I was like, oh, what's a deacon? Um, and then fast forward almost 30 years, 20 years to I I'm living my life. I was already married. We already had kids. I'm involved in the church. I wasn't like I didn't really ever, I was a musician in my parish. I was fairly involved in the church. I'm not going to say that I was the most holy, devout person in the world, but I was involved in the church. It's not like I was ignorant about the church. I never had bad, or rather, I should say, I always had very good church experiences, and I think that that's important in keeping
Mm-hmm.
people in the church. I was
Mm-hmm.
involved in youth group and young adult group and this and that and the other. And then in 2000, I had the chance to work for the World Youth Day office, World Youth Day 2002 in Toronto. I was hired to be the artistic director. And my background is theater. Um, and again, I did not plan that. That was a gift. It didn't even occur to me that that would even happen or that that was even an opportunity. And next thing I know, I'm in charge of all the artistic programming for 6 days with Pope John Paul II. And anyway, it was an incredible experience, and it was a conversion experience to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Not like St. Paul conversion, but gradual. I think we all have little conversions every day, and this was World Youth Day is a very unique and powerful experience for anyone who participates in World Youth Day, and those who have worked to organize a World Youth Day. I mean, I was working on World Youth Day for a year and a half, and so that completely changed. It changed my life in that I began to understand church better because I think most
Mm-hmm.
people don't really understand. Church for them is their little parish, um, and not the universal church. And after World Youth Day, I was not sure because I had been working as an actor and teaching actors, coaching actors, and trying to make it as an actor and in film and TV and theater. And after World Youth Day, I just didn't feel like I should I continue doing that. I just wasn't. First of all, it wasn't fulfilling, and it wasn't. Nothing was happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know how it's like in the film industry, and
I do. I do.
and I didn't know, and I felt called to work for the church. I actually felt called to work alongside the bishop, and I didn't know what that meant. Interestingly,
That's interesting and very
it,
specific
it is very
in the
specific, and I had
call.
no idea what that calling was, or what that feeling was, that draw.
Hmm.
I thought, should I go back to school, get a theology degree, or go be a youth minister, or what? And then I was hired to work. Sorry, and then Salt and Light
Hmm.
started. So then I went to work for Salt and Light,
Which is where we had the
which is where
opportunity
we
to
are. Yeah,
work
that was 20
together.
years ago. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But About 2 years after World Youth Day, two guys in my parish were ordained to the diaconate. And I remembered 20 years earlier when I was 12 years old, it's like, oh, permanent deacons. And I started thinking about the permanent diaconate, but not very seriously. So here's to the second part of your question. My wife is not Catholic.
Mm.
So um, I was very aware that, one thing is working for the church, working for Salt and Light Television, or working for World Youth Day, or, going to Mass on Sundays, being involved in my parish, Vacation Bible Camp or whatever. But to be a deacon, I thought that might be a little too much. And if my wife is not 100% on board, this is just not going to go. And if it's going to be a wedge in my marriage, that's not going to fly either. Because when we talk about vocations, my primary vocation is marriage,
Mm.
even though the deacons have two vocations, ordained life
Mm.
and married life. But our primary vocation is married life. And so I didn't say anything to my wife. And then one day we were at Mass, and I don't know what was happening, that the church was packed and we were late because when you have little kids, you're always late. And we ended up sitting in the back pew, which we never did because when you have little kids, you actually want to sit in the front so they can see better and they're less distracted. So there's
Mhm.
good advice there when you have kids, Jermaine. Um,
Taking
but
notes,
we,
taking notes.
but we ended up sitting in the back and it was like horrible. And the kids were like surfing in the pews and people are talking. And it was horrible. I'm exaggerating. I'm sure it wasn't horrible. But then one of the deacons preached the homily, and the homily was horrible. I don't know. It was just not a good mass experience for me. And I must have said something kind of under my breath during the homily because my wife turned to me and she said, "Well, if you think you can do better, why don't you become a deacon?" And I was like, "Okay, actually, I've been thinking
The
about it."
gauntlet was thrown down.
Exactly. So then she brought it up. We spoke about it. It wasn't a
Hmm.
long conversation. She's like, yeah. I mean, she's not the one that's being ordained. She doesn't have to be
Yeah.
Catholic. She just has to support me and agree
Hmm.
to it. And so
Hmm.
I pursued. Um, so
And
again,
then,
this is a good tip for people who are trying to figure out kind of where God is calling you in your life,
hmm,
whether it is something big like religious life or ordained life or
hmm,
even marriage. Um, but anything like, should I take this job? Should I go to that university? Should I, move to another city? Those are questions that need to be discerned. And if you feel that God is calling you, then I think that getting confirmation. So one is to feel the call. So you
hmm.
have a desire. I think God places that desire in your heart. So I had a desire. I didn't know what it was for, but I had a desire. Um, and then the next thing is that you get confirmation, and you get confirmation, at least in my experience, from people around you. So your
Hmm.
sister says something, or your mom says something, or your
So
friend says something, or
that
my friend.
unprompted
Exactly, right? So the fact that my wife said
reciprocation.
something,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, okay. And then you can explore. So start exploring. So I started exploring. I spoke with the diocesan vocations director, and then I met with the coordinator of deacons, and then I met with and as I explored more, I received more and more confirmations. Again, random people. One time I went to a friend of mine was being ordained. He's a priest,
Hmm.
but he was being ordained to the diaconate. And so I went to his ordination, and I was late again. Well, I wasn't late, but I was arriving just as the opening procession was starting,
Did you end
and
up in those back pews
he was
again?
just getting ready for the opening procession, and he saw me come into the church, and he literally like stepped away from the procession and went up to me and said, "I was just thinking about you because I was thinking you'd be a great deacon." And
Oh
I
my
was like,
goodness.
and I had already actually started the application process, but I hadn't told him.
Okay. And
So
this was
again,
after the conversation with your
yeah, this
wife
was
that
after
oh,
this. I had already started
okay.
the application into the program. So
Hmm.
again, it's like I was getting constantly little confirmations like that. Somebody would say
Yeah.
something, or I would read something, or something, and and then my attitude. I don't know if this is a good attitude or not, but my attitude was, God, if you want me to do this, keep opening the doors. If you don't, close the doors, and
Hmm.
I'm not gonna kill myself over this. This is your thing. And I was accepted into the program. I survived the program 4 years.
How it's a 4-year program?
It's a 4 year part time. So
Gotcha.
it's at least in the Archdiocese of Toronto. It
Hmm.
depends. It depends on where you go. Here in the Archdiocese of Toronto, it's done in conjunction, it's done through the seminary, St. Augustine Seminary, and it's a 4 year, it's 10 weekends a month, 4 years, so 40 weekends.
Okay.
Because it's designed for men that have families and that work. So once
Hmm.
a month we would go to the seminary, not even the whole weekend. We'd be Saturday. Saturday was a long day, like Saturday from like 8 till 8, and then Sundays from like 9 till 3, kind of thing.
Okay.
And then during the
And
week you had small group meetings
yeah.
and assignments and stuff.
And with it being through the seminary, is this like getting like a master's in theology, or is it's just specifically
No,
the
no,
diaconate program and just kind of like learning the ways and that sort of thing?
no. Again, I think that it depends on the diocese and the program. The one that we did is done in conjunction with the Toronto School of Theology. So
Okay.
you get a theology diploma. It's
Hmm.
not it's not a no, to do a master's would be a lot more intense. And it's not
Gotcha.
intended, I mean, the deacon, we don't have to be like theologians. I would argue that
Yeah.
even priests don't have to be theologians. We have to be pastors. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of emphasis in pastoral care. So there's
Hmm.
like, like you have the academic formation, the the personal formation, and the pastoral formation. So they try to find a balance between those three.
Hmm.
So we did learn the academic because we have to get the diploma. So we had to fulfill the academic requirements, which is a diploma. And then we had the pastoral component and, practical pastoral
Yeah.
placements and homiletics and just stuff that we should know as deacons. But the
Yeah.
personal is, I think, probably the more important, that personal formation.
Well, absolutely. From what you said earlier, you're out in the community and going out to serve. Like if you're out in prisons and out in the community and out in all these different places, that person to person
Yeah.
side of things strikes me as that would be paramount. Like
That
having
absolutely. So
having a
yeah,
heart for service in what you're doing.
absolutely. So learning how to listen. Um, the ministry of presence really is what they call it. So how to be present to someone, how to tune into a person's suffering. Um, a lot of times it's the deacon that's sitting next to someone in the hospital who's dying, and that person can't even speak, but you're
Hmm.
there, and you're there for the family. Um, the priest might come in, and priests are great too at doing this, but sometimes the priest is only able to come in, do the anointing. If they can do a confession, they will, but then they have to go, and it's the deacon that's there, that stays. Deacons, I actually forgot to say, a deacon can also officiate funerals. So when it's not obviously outside of mass, the deacon can do a funeral, and quite often the deacon does the funeral because they've been walking with the family and the patient through that process of dying. Um, and we do interments as well, so we're able to do the interment at the cemetery as well. So those are things. You're right. I mean, that's the most important thing about being a deacon. But I think it translates to, like, if you're good at that or you're able to do that, then how you preach is going to be different.
Hmm.
How you're at liturgy is going to be different. How you greet people at the door at mass is going to be different. Um, and again, I
Yeah.
think people see that, and maybe that's another reason why they're drawn to deacons as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. And part of your diaconate class, I have to give a big shout out for to Mr. Gennaro. I
Yes,
grew up with him, and I remember he
he's a
announced he's
super
like, oh,
deacon.
he Mr. General's fantastic, and he had said that he's like, oh, I've become a deacon, and I wasn't really practicing. I'm very much a revert, and I was just like, oh, cool, because I had no idea, and now in retrospect, as I've gotten older, had my reversion, and worked with you at Sultanite for several years, and uh, that statement carries so much more weight now that I have an understanding. And even this in this conversation, just getting a chance to
Yeah.
learn of the duties and the call and the journey it takes to become one. It is really fascinating. Something I'm curious to know is obviously you perform your service and you work within the church. I'm curious to know how becoming a deacon has impacted how you are as a husband, as a father, and how it's impacted your work as a producer at Salt and Light.
Yeah, yeah. So two things, and I'm glad you asked that question because I didn't. I was going to say you had asked me earlier, kind of how my family had been part of that discernment process. Um, when I went into the program, our oldest son was 12 and our youngest was 9. And it was a question that was brought up with us as to why we didn't wait until our children were older. And it was very clear to me and my wife that we wanted to do this when our children were still younger, impressionable, and at home. Whereas a lot of deacons, I regret to say that sometimes they're encouraged to wait. Be easier
Mm,
once you're retired, or it'd be easier once your children are not at home. But we wanted our children to be part of this experience. So, again, my kids were not going to the seminary and being trained to be deacons, but it just became a part of our normal living. It's like they know that their dad's a deacon, and once a month we had deacons coming to our house for our weekly gathering. And so they knew it's like, oh, the deacons are coming, or it's deacon meeting night or whatever. They got to know other deacons. They get to hear me now that I'm ordained. They go to mass. They get to hear me preach at mass. I don't have to preach to them at home because I can preach to them at mass. Um, so it just kind of, I would say that that's how my family participated in that. It just became a normal thing, and we always wanted to do that. Even though my wife is not Catholic, I think that we agreed in that we wanted religion or spirituality or Catholicism, Christianity to be normal. So we didn't do things that were just not normal. It's just normal. We live in a Catholic house, and there's a picture of Mary over here with a prayer, and there's a crucifix in every room, and we
mm,
pray at night, and so it just becomes a normal thing. And on Sunday we go to church, and you go to. My kids ended up not going to youth group, but they went to Catholic school, and my oldest son played at mass as a musician as well, and so it just
mm,
became it's just like a normal thing that you do,
mhm.
and it wasn't awkward. So that's kind of how they participated. Um, and then I forgot your second question, the one that you just asked me, because it also had to
The,
do with
the other part of that is how has it impacted your work as a producer for
yeah,
Salt and Light?
yeah. So I'd say that it's impacted my family in that sense, is that it's just
Mm,
become normal. So, nowadays we talk about, you hear, with the woke ideologies, like they want to normalize certain things that
mm,
we as Christians would be like, well, I don't know if that should be normalized because maybe it's not normal.
mhm.
Um, but I think that we want to normalize faith, but
Absolutely.
maybe not normalize it too much that we take it for granted. So I think in my family, it's just been normal. My dad's a
Mm,
deacon. This is what he does. It's like a normal thing. It's not weird. Faith is not weird. Deacons are not weird. Priests are not weird. We have priest friends, obviously. Same with working at Salt and Light. It's like my dad works. Like my kids grew up knowing that I was a TV producer for a Catholic television network. And they might not sit and watch Salt and Light television, but they know, and it's like they know about In Your Faith, and they know about Yes, Lord, and they know about deconstructing, and it's just normal. That's what I do. They know that I go to World Youth Day every World Youth Day. They know that, in fact, my oldest son went to Madrid with me for World Youth Day 2011. Um, they know that, it's like, oh, the Pope is doing something, I'm involved somehow. So it just kind of becomes a normal thing. So I think that that's how it's impacted um, the family. How it's impacted my work is interesting because no one's ever asked me that question, Jermaine, actually. I, I'm going to
I'm
say
glad
that,
that's the first.
yeah, no, but it's a good question. I'm going to say that, and to what Mike Gennaro said to you, Deacon Gennaro, about becoming a deacon, I have a sense that it's the other way around. It's like God decided that you're going to be a deacon way before you even knew it. So it's like you are a deacon, and then one day you realized it. It's like I was always a deacon, and now the church has officially recognized it. it's almost that sense that
Hmm.
that personality was there, that desire was there, that all the elements that needed were there, and then they've been sort of honed and are being used now in service of the church and in service of Christ. Um, so how it's impacted my work, I think it's given me more, and again, this is going to sound not right, but it's given me more confidence. It's like
I could see that. I can see that.
before I could speak and it was just Pedro speaking, but now I speak and it's Deacon Pedro and I speak with the authority of the church. I have to be very careful that when I speak, I am speaking with the authority of the church.
Hmm.
And I would say this to priests, anyone who's ordained, who is, a company man, and that doesn't mean that you have to go against things that you might be struggling with, but make sure that when you're speaking with the authority of the church. That's a huge responsibility.
Hmm.
When I'm preaching a homily, I have to make sure that everything I'm saying is 100% doctrinally sound,
Hmm.
100% pastorally appropriate, and 100% with the Pope and in obedience to my bishop,
Hmm.
very clearly. Um, and that's the same in my work. And I'm in a job where I get to explain things of the church and I get to do programs about the church. So it's a kind of that, I think, makes it a little easier. But if I was a banker or a lawyer or a doctor, I think that it would be the same. It's like, how, as a doctor, am I speaking and acting as with the authority of the church? And the authority of the church is the authority of Jesus Christ, in everything I do. But then I would say that we are all called to do that, you know, speaking and behaving as Christians, but not with the authority of the church. Germain needs to be a good Christian, kind and gentle and compassionate and charitable. But you don't have to speak with the authority of the church. I do.
Yeah, correct. And I can definitely see that. And working alongside you while I was at Salt and Light, I what's the way to describe it? Unfortunately, this is like probably a reference to Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but there's a certain gravitas that comes with it, and I definitely saw that in the work and that you're producing, and definitely in just how the way you were able to the way you continue to communicate the word and what it means to be Catholic and what it means to be Christian, what it means to walk the faith, and the programs that you've created really help that from like little ones to much older. And
Yeah. And it's
yeah, I
hard
can.
because it means that sometimes it's better not to say anything. And sometimes the church leadership is criticized for that. It's like, why is the church not responding to X issue or Y issue?
Hmm.
Sometimes it means that we need to just not say anything. And again, it's that ministry of presence, listening.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
am I going to say something that it might be doctrinally sound, but is it going to be divisive or is it
Hmm.
going to be taken the wrong way? Maybe I should
Yeah.
not say anything until
Yeah.
when we started producing. So one of the first shows that I produced at Salt and Light was a show called In Your Faith.
Hmm.
And this was a desire to explain basic things of the faith to teenagers, high school students, and we actually had focus groups with high school students and teachers, and to figure out topics and things like that. So we did topics like, I mean, basic topics like what is God, who is Jesus, who is Mary, what are the sacraments, who's the Pope, basic things in the faith. But I knew right from the beginning that I was not going to explain difficult things like ordination of women or the
Hmm.
celibate priesthood if
Hmm.
I didn't fully understand it.
Hmm.
And these are not easy things to understand. So if I don't fully understand it, how am I going to explain it to a 14-year-old in a
Yeah.
half an hour TV show?
Hmm.
So that's very serious. And I wasn't a deacon at the time, but I had that sense that it's like, how? So I
Oh
mean, it's
yeah,
good that I was
not
interested.
wanting to be flippant and reckless in one's language. So,
Not wanting to be flippant and reckless, but also not wanting to mislead or not wanting to
mm,
cause division, because I think that everything that we do in the church, and this is why I think Pope Francis is so amazing. I mean, he's not a theologian, he's not a philosopher like Benedict and John Paul II. He's a pastor.
mm,
And so everything he says it because he's looking at doctrine through a pastoral lens. So it's like we have these pastoral glasses that we put on, so you can look at the catechism and you can hit people over the head with the catechism, or you can put on your pastoral glasses and look at that teaching through pastoral lens. And that might change, doesn't change the doctrine, it doesn't change truth, but it might change how you approach it with that specific person. And
gotcha.
ultimately that's what matters, because when you're evangelizing, or when you're I mean, that's what we do when we evangelize, when we're bringing the good news. The most important thing is not doctrine or truth. The most important thing is the person that's sitting across the table from you, that the person. So
Hmm.
where is that person? What's their background? What's their relationship or relationships? What are their circumstances? And then just be, that's why ministry of presence, I think, is so important. Sit with that person. And it might take years for that person to be evangelized. It's not my job to evangelize. Holy Spirit can evangelize without me. Fine. How am I helping meet that person where that person is,
Hmm.
and helping the Spirit kind of lead the way. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that gives a real, it helps give a real sense of that ministry of presence, of meeting people where they are, and that feels like it really not sums up the diaconate, but really speaks to the approach, like how you describe Pope Francis, the pastoral lens
yeah, yeah,
with doctrine and meeting people where they are. That really helps to give a sense of the approach and the diaconate, and I'm sure each deacon brings their own particular gifts to the role. So some might be higher levels of that pastoral care versus that theological knowledge and that sort of thing, and just using their specific gifts to live that out.
yeah, yeah, for sure. You're right. Yeah, I think I'm a good preacher. That's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a gift I have. I'm a communicator. I studied theater. Why did God want me to study theater? I don't think that was an accident. I thought God wanted me to be a rich and famous actor. Clearly, that was not God's plan. I don't know if God wants anybody to be a rich and famous actor.
Mm-hmm.
Why did I go to theater school? Is it so that I could communicate the word better? So that's a gift I have. I think I'm a good listener. I think I can sit with people. But some deacons are great at just doing hospital visits. Or I know a deacon who he's doing 2 or 3 funerals a week.
Oh wow.
And you know what? I've never done one funeral because I'm not, that's not, not that I don't want to. It's just not a
Mm-hmm.
gift I have
Yeah.
to be able to. I can be with people when they're dying, and I can help with walk with the families, but to do the funeral, that's just it's just I don't have that gift. And you can say the same thing about priests. Some priests are great confessors in the confessional. Some priests are great preachers. Some priests are great at pastoral care and working with young people, or engaging. So how do we use our gifts in the service of the church and in service of Christ? Uh, and that's why the church is universal, because then we can all work together, and your gift complements my gift, and someone else's gift complements our gifts, and we're a beautiful, colorful garden.
Yeah. That that is everything.
Yeah.
And so before we go, what advice do you think you could share with men who are considering the diaconate? They're not sure. What parting words of wisdom can you offer them?
Classic, I would say classic Ignatian discernment. So, do you have a desire first? Because if you have a desire, God put that desire in your heart. Do you have the gifts, the talents? Because maybe you feel called to be a deacon, but you're terrified of public speaking and you don't like going to hospitals. So maybe you're not called to be a deacon. But if you have the gifts and you have the desire, and then do you have the opportunity? In my case, the opportunity happened.
Mm.
So if those three things align, because maybe it's not the right, to be a deacon, if you're married, you have to have been married for 7 years at least, because they don't want, they want to make sure that your marriage is established. You
Mm.
have to be at least 35 years old. Again, they don't want really, really young guys. Um, so maybe it's not the right time. Maybe you're in your 20s and you're like, I feel a desire to be a deacon. Well, you're not being called to be a deacon now because you have to be 35. And if you just got married at 35, you're going to have to wait another 7 years.
Mhm.
So, but when those three things align, the desire, the talent or the gifts, and the opportunity, then maybe that's a sign that God's saying, this is where I'm calling you. And then what I said earlier, confirmation. Are you getting something that you read, something that you heard, you bumped into a deacon or someone said to you, hey, have you thought about the diaconate? And then I'd say, you know what? If it's in your heart, ask. Go and meet with a deacon and call me, Deacon Pedro, at Deacon Pedro, look for me, ask me. Um, um, Speak to deacons, speak to priests and see, hey, what do you think? I'm thinking about the diaconate. Do you think this is for me? And see what kind of feedback you get. And if it's the right thing, I'm telling you, you can fight God all you want, but God's going to reel you in at one time or another. So, and definitely, I think that one of those people needs to be your wife. The wife has to be 100% on board.
Mm.
Um, and I think a good deacon's wife is the one that's 100% on board, but 100% detached. It's like, you're ordained, you're the deacon, not me. I make sure that, and some wives get angry when I say this, but it's like, really, you know what my wife does? She makes sure that when I'm running, like I had preaching and I had 3 masses in the morning and I run home because I have to then go to the hospital. She makes sure that there's like a sandwich, and as I run by, she shoves the sandwich in my mouth, and it's like, make sure that you eat and make sure that you have, your shirts are clean,
Mm.
because so that, and that doesn't mean that she's my servant. It just means that that's how she's supporting me so that I can do the ministry. And then she's also very good at telling me when I'm doing too much. It's like,
Mm.
you know what, maybe you should be home that weekend and stop preaching every other weekend because that's too much. And then, we're very blessed to have wives to root us in reality. Priests don't have that. Deacons do. So I'd say, yeah, desire, gifts, opportunity, confirmation from other people, and then just start asking questions. Speak to a deacon and see where that leads.
Well, that is perfect, and I'll put your where they can reach you in the show notes,
Yeah,
and
please. Go
people
ahead and put on my
don't be
my
shy.
email address. I'm happy if people want to email pedro@slmedia.org.
Okay, perfect.
Easy, yeah, they can email
I'll
me
make
or
sure that's in there.
find me on Instagram or Facebook.
Oh,
I think I'm the only Deacon Pedro, at Deacon Pedro. There are other Deacon
the one
Pedros.
and only.
Yeah, I
All
got
right.
that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience. I can't thank you enough.
No, thank you for inviting me. This was a great conversation, and I hope that it's been useful for your viewers.